The Earth is the cradle of humanity, but mankind cannot stay in that cradle forever. Sometimes the very thing that protects us and gives us life is the same thing that becomes our greatest limitation. And as humans, our instinct is to be free. The question is, how much are we willing to retaliate against Mother Nature to get what we want? Oda is cooking a story that continues to make us transcend the levels of conversations on this channel, with a single reveal in chapter sent it to everyone back in Wano, which most of you know by now how much I love making connections, but if you don't, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the ParVision. So in order to understand where we are going, I have to preface 3 ideas. First was Threeville's Gorosei prediction that he made a year prior and was revealed to have some truth in 1073, which was that the Gorosei might reflect the planets orbiting the sun besides the Earth. This was something we found during the live reaction and discussed at length. If you want to hear his logic and how he expanded on it, go check out his video discussing it. The second thing I want to talk about is something Hidden Island brought up at the Reverie, in that the Gorosei could be Imu satellites, and highlighted the point that the Gorosei at the time was understood to be the 5 elder stars, and now even more accurately translated as the 5 elder planets, as we see with Mr. St. J. Garcia Saturn. Both of these ideas could connect or be true separately, and I just want to highlight how awesome it is that the community has been able to productively analyze this story in such a romantic way, and for that effort to be rewarded by the story that keeps on giving back to us. I mean, one of the ways you could connect the ideas is something that post 1073 many people have discussed, in that maybe the status quo of the One Piece world represents a geocentric system where Imu is the Earth or Mother Nature, and the planets that Threeville mentioned, which are the closest planets to the sun, spanning from Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, would be the satellites for Earth. And I've been playing with this idea myself truthfully, and there's so many ways to contextualize it. I was thinking maybe the One Piece story is a transition from the geocentric system to the heliocentric system, but it was hard for me to find a narrative purpose, especially for this particular discussion. The man that first established the heliocentric system being Nicolaus Copernicus, and I was like, maybe that's where Nico Robin's family name references, but we may discuss that at a later time. So to add the third idea that helps contextualize this discussion is my own that I shared in Wano, in the realization that the ancient weapons might be Joyboy's commanders. If we look throughout One Piece, the commanders of a crew have some kind of group name or thematic, from Doflamingo's elite officers with card suit themes to Big Mom's sweet commanders. I mean, in the Straw Hats, we had the Monster Trio for a time, but the group that sparked the idea was Kaido's Calamities. Underneath his wings, he harnessed the power of the Wildfire, Plague, and Drought. These were the names that referred to King, Queen, and Jack, whose names also reflect the court cards in a deck of cards. But anyways, these 3 epithets given to Kaido's commanders could easily be misunderstood if you were only given a description of their powers that reflected their epithet. If you time skipped 800 years and heard the rumors of the King of Beasts Plague, you'd be very confused if you found out this is what that meant. And so in the same light, the ancient weapons might be that same thing. We know that Poseidon, for example, that was described to be a power that could sink the entire world using the power of sea kings, is surprisingly held within an unsuspecting mermaid who apparently randomly awakens this power. It could be that the ancient weapons were just the epithets that Joyboy's renowned crew gained over time. Poseidon, Pluton, and even Uranus could have simply been the strongest in the crew, and that's where we connect back to the recent revelations and the other theories here. Who else could have been in the crew? Well, if you're going by the solar system, naturally the other planets would make sense. If this guy's name is Saturn, then like Threeville said, the rest of the Gorosei could be the other planets. Joyboy would be the sun, like Luffy as Sun God Nika, and what's left is Mother Earth, the person we are associating with Imu, and at one point the crew revolved around the sun, but through some development ended up with a geocentric model where they revolved around Imu. Now, you might be confused at what I'm saying. I'm proposing the idea that Imu and Joyboy were of the same crew. The ancient weapons and Gorosei were all comrades. Together, they made a crew of 10. To read out all the names in the crew, it'd be Captain Sun God Nika, Mercury, Venus, Terra for Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Poseidon, and Pluton. Now, a discrepancy is that the planet names at the end are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which besides Uranus are the Roman gods equivalents to the Greek names Poseidon and Pluton respectively. But at the end of the day, we get a similar situation where Oda created a multifaceted group thematic, making it reasonable to associate each one with each other. Now, what I'm proposing is that the original group might have been made up of the Greek names and converted into the Roman names later, and so hold on to that thought, but also prefacing that the rest of this is purely me reaching for the stars in terms of ideas, as that seems to be what Oda wants us to do here. We know he sometimes loosely or strictly ties back the One Piece story to real life history and mythology, and it's difficult to know when it's a one-to-one reference, but this might be what happened here. So through some kind of betrayal, Gaia or Terra, who is essentially Mother Earth, decided to betray sun god Nika. Naturally, the analogy that could be made is that there was a solar eclipse, meaning the representative of the moon got between Terra and Nika. Remember the line, "You are the moon unaware of the dawn"? The way I understand that line is several times we get antagonists that believe they are the new dawn, who will bring out a better world order. From Kaido at one point thinking he was Joyboy to Enel thinking he was returning the world to a natural state, or Crocodile, Hody, literally most of the people thought they were the light for people to follow, only to realize they were just the moon and Luffy is the sun. But going back to what could possibly create a rift between the sun god and proposed Mother Earth. Within One Piece, we have had this thematic of falsehood or misunderstanding happen several times, and the vehicle for this misunderstanding or betrayal was actually the Mane Mane no Mi, or the clone fruit. The first time was to impersonate Nefertari Cobra, and the second time was to impersonate Kozuki Sukiyaki and Kozuki Momonosuke. I wouldn't be surprised if this clone fruit played a larger role in the story, especially now that we are receiving Clone Piece, where everyone is suspected of being a clone, and unfortunately that might not end with me. What I am proposing is a parallel to what Hidden thought. The Gorosei are the satellites for Imu, similar to Vegapunk satellites, but what we learned of Vegapunk satellites is that they are clones, or at least some of them are. And what I think is that the Gorosei are the clones of the original crewmates that Joyboy had. When cloned, they received the new Roman names, which is low-key similar to what happened in our actual mythology. It was basically like the Romans just cloned and slightly altered the Greek gods. The ones that could not be cloned were Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, but they might have tried. Pluton being a ship couldn't be cloned in the same light as a person, but we do know they might have created a replica blueprint of Pluton that ended up being lost to them. Poseidon's powers might not have been able to be recreated due to its reincarnation nature. But lastly, Uranus, the ancient weapon that we have virtually no information on, might have actually been central to everything. So naturally, it makes sense to look at how Uranus's mythology could be related here. Unlike Poseidon and Pluton, Uranus wasn't a god. Uranus was the literal sky, more similar to Gaia and Terra being the primordial embodiment of the earth. We have discussed this primordial entity a few times in the Shadows theory and Void Century theory. An important quick takeaway from those videos is that the kanji used for void in Void Century is Shiro and Sora for white sky. The understanding as why sky is synonymous with void is because the sky is basically an empty space, and keyword empty because the empty throne uses the kanji kyo, which also means void, or as we talked about in my Imu video, could mean weakness or falsehood. So the Void Century could relate directly to Uranus's power because it could be read as White Sky Century, which we discussed at length in that video. But to rewind real quickly, why is the name Uranus important and how does it relate to Gaia? Well, interestingly enough, in mythology, Uranus was both the son of Gaia, birthed in order to cover all sides of the earth, but also the husband as well. Together they created the Titans, and Uranus made it so the Titans were stuck within Gaia. And in order to avenge her children, Gaia had Kronos, the embodiment of time and the youngest Titan, castrate Uranus. And if you didn't already know, Kronos is the Greek version of Saturn, so that gets a bit confusing now. But at least within the One Piece story, having a son could have many meanings. Maybe the least weird one, where someone could be the husband and son at the same time, is that Gaia recreated Uranus scientifically. The lover aspect is where things might fit in well within the story. It could be that Im created a replacement for a son or husband, but the replacement did not fall in line with the other gods. As to why a replacement was needed, maybe there was some sort of betrayal within the story where Uranus was impersonated, or maybe they could have died in battle as a tragedy, similar to the actual story of Uranus. Now, all of that probably sounds really confusing, but here, let me put this in One Piece terms. Is there an entity that commonly gets connected to Uranus, that betrayed the Celestial Dragons, and was impersonated in the story? Yeah, there was. It was the Nefertari. The original Nefertari king did not join the 20 kings at Mary-Joie, and now that we know that the Gorosei are also saints like the other celestial dragons, it could be that if the Nefertari king joined, he would have been a Saint Nefertari, and a part of the Gorosei as Uranus. But obviously it wouldn't be the Gorosei then, it'd be the Rorosei technically. But anyways, we also do know that between the Nefertari and Joyboy, there had to be some kind of friendly connection or alliance, as they were the nation entrusted with the poneglyph that divulged the location and power of Pluton. And on top of everything else, we actually got an exact parallel of a situation where the sitting monarch Nefertari Cobra was impersonated by a clone and his people turned against him because of it. And I know I've spoken about this, but if you haven't already heard of why the Nefertari are associated with Uranus yet, it's because in chapter 210, at the end of the war, it is speculated that Vivi, through her desire for the war to end, commanded the sky to make it rain. And Uranus, being the embodiment of the sky, is the connection here. But also the etymology for Uranus finds that the meaning for Uranus could be rainmaker or lord of the rain. All of this meaning that, like Shirahoshi, where the power of Poseidon is passed on through some form of lineage, the power of Uranus could be tied to the Nefertari lineage. And if we were to tie the original Nefertari king to be a part of the legendary Joyboy crew and a defector to Imu's revolution, then it would explain why the Gorosei regarded the entire lineage as traitors. It could be that without Uranus's association with them, the equilibrium of their orbit is much more difficult to maintain, which could be why, though Cobra was killed, it seems like Vivi's life was spared through some circumstance. When Joyboy and Imu's worlds collide, Vivi's existence will most likely be at the center of it all. And here's one last major thing I want to add. Oda may have given us the true name of Uranus. If Uranus was related to Imu, or had Imu's blessing, then the perfect candidate of legends would be the proposed hero of the Marines, Sora, the warrior of the sea. Sora, whose name means sky, which ties them to the name Uranus. If Imu is the sea, then Sora would be their warrior. It could even be that their name was Nefertari Sora. Tying Sora to Uranus could make a lot of sense in this line of logic, because if the Nefertari was both on the side of the world government and the ancient kingdom, then the warrior of the sea would fit. I would imagine that the warrior of the sea and warrior of liberation would be friends if they met, as the sea and liberty seem to be synonymous in the story of One Piece. But at the same time, again, if Imu represents the sea, that would create a compromised relationship for Sora. I mean, when you think about it, we actually have a character on Luffy's crew that wants to be the brave warrior of the sea, and ironically was proclaimed to be a god. And anyways, it gets really confusing trying to fit all of these different ideas here in one video, but know that there will be more videos on this topic. And if you haven't already, check out my YouTube shorts on Sora. Now, there's a lot of other things I want to add and discuss, but by now, you know me, I have so many ideas, and it's best to separate out some of these other discussion points, because I think amongst everything Oda has done, the celestial thematic has been so insidiously involved within the story from the very beginning. I mean, the rookies were called supernovas, and even that could be an important detail for Space Piece. But before I go, I want to give some other fringe ideas that come to mind with this line of thinking that might interest you. And so if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and sharing the video, and most importantly, subscribing to the channel. Okay, so an idea that I was planning on expanding on in a completely separate video was that in the chance that the Gorosei were clones of original people, then it could be that the powers of those original people are paralleled somehow in either the Devil Fruits or maybe even in the Straw Hat crew. Like if Venus existed as Aphrodite's, it could easily be that Boa's Mero Mero no Mi was created from them as the embodiment of love. But also Oda stated that Queen Otahime was the literal embodiment of love. So there's many many options here. Saturn was known as Kronos, the primordial god of time, and there are several fruits that could be related, from Toki, Shinobu, or Bani's. Maybe it could be that the powers were split up within the devil fruits, but it could be why Bani is so important at the same time. Toki being from the Void Century though makes things super interesting because she could be connected to all of this. But then there's Jupiter as Zeus, who could be Enel, and the other planetary connections could lead you to relative devil fruit powers that could have originated from Joyboy's crew. It could be that, like the Poneglyphs being a remnant to preserve the ancient kingdom's history, maybe the devil fruits were a failsafe in the situation where the ancient kingdom's peoples were lost. And something that I want to mention before I leave you is the weird and random connection that may be related. We cannot forget that while Poseidon could be the substitute for Neptune in the planetary connection idea, we actually have King Neptune of Ryugu Kingdom. He exists. I mean, I have the video that explains how there could be fishman celestial dragons that are right in our faces and we wouldn't even know, and how there are a plethora of connections for the celestial dragon's name itself to tell us the truth here. It could be that Neptune's family was also one that was part of Joyboy's original crew. I don't even know where to go with this connection other than that King Neptune is definitely in the spotlight for me with the name drop for Saint Saturn. And one last thing to let you guys know of one of the directions I was looking at, it was that especially now it's more than clear that the world government may connect to Rome, making the leadership tied to the Vatican and Catholicism. But the interesting thing about it all is that the title of saint is given to people after they die. Once their deeds while they were alive are assessed for their tribute to God and the value they provided, they are nominated for sainthood, and usually it takes a minimum of 5 years to determine who can become a saint. So maybe that supports that maybe the celestial dragons were originally clones that were essentially replacements for their dead predecessors. It makes you wonder if Oda drew a connection here. I mean, one of my favorite connections is that the empty throne resembles the Holy See of the Vatican City, which is the sovereign of Vatican City, the religious capital which in many ways holds influence over the entire world. But that's also a conversation for another day. I know that I've been less connected with my community recently, but I hope as I restabilize my orbit with the addition of my sun Zenith, I can start sharing more of my ideas again that bring light to your days more often. And if you haven't already, consider joining the ParVision Galaxy by subscribing to the channel. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next ParVision.